if we look to some examples also in the Quran, we find that the term that I think is preferred to use when we talk about misinterpretation is the word ghulu, right? We don't really have the word tatarruf, right? Because it comes from a taraf, which is how it's usually translated from extremism into Arabic, which means to be on the edge of something. Radicalism, I'm not even aware that there's a finite Arabic term to take that on, but we do have this concept of ghulu, right? When the Quran says to the people of the book, Ya ahl al-kitabi la taghlu fi dinikum wa la taqulu ala Allahi illa al-haq. O people of the book, do not have this ghulu, do not go out of bounds in your understanding of the religion, and do not say anything but haqq, but truth. And one of the things that this ayah is referring to were the Christians who went out of bounds and referred to Jesus as a divine person or half divine or a deity or as the God or the Son of God. And that was reaction to another ghulu, right? It was a reaction to another extreme where the Jews defied even the idea that Jesus was a prophet, right? They didn't accept his prophecy. So that was another extreme. So what happens often is that extreme responses also come as a reaction to extreme steps. And the challenge is to have a measured, balanced response when there are extreme steps. Because the natural human inclination is, okay, you know, he came out with me with two rights and two lefts, then I'm going to come out with him with something way beyond, right? Shock and awe, right? Modern militaries use that term. The American military, for example, after Vietnam, right, when more or less, by all consensus, they pretty much lost that war, they said never again. Now, anytime we're going to engage in a military engagement, we are going to come with complete overwhelming force to the degree where we don't want any casualties from our side. And shock and awe. So to completely put the enemy in a state where they don't even have the ability to garner a response. And that's something, obviously, that comes out of the modern age that we're living in, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. So we have this concept of ghulu. We have this concept of going into extremes. The woman, for example, that the Prophet ﷺ, he found her praying at night, but yet she had tied two sticks and she had a rope, and she was hanging on the rope so that she may pray. And he told her, don't pray. Go to sleep, right? Because that's an extreme, right? That's something that's outside the proper understanding of the deen. We don't go to those particular lengths, right? While praying is praiseworthy and it's something good to do, but not at the expense of you having to do it in this manner. That's outside of the sunnah, right? We mentioned the other night in the Shama'il, the man who had his camel and he's walking it towards Hajj, and it was his hedi, it was a sacrificial animal. Prophet ﷺ asked him, why aren't you riding it? He said, Inna hadi ya Rasulullah, it's a sacrificial animal. And the Prophet ﷺ said, so what? Ride it. Right? Because it's not from, so what you're going to sacrifice? It doesn't mean you can't ride it to your destination. You can. So when we use kind of our own intuition about something, and that intuition is not based upon sound understanding, such as was the mistake of whom? Satan, in the very beginning, right? He used what we call qiyas. He used an analogy saying, okay, I'm fire, he's clay, I'm better than clay, why should I prostrate to him? So he did all of these kind of mental gymnastics, but he ignored what? An-nas. He ignored the direct command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One is very clear what was being requested and asked of him. And the reason that he did that is because his ego wouldn't allow it. So one of the, I think, the hallmarks of modern day ghulu or modern day extremism is that it's often masquerading as religion. It's put this kind of veneer on it, and it's presented to everybody else like, no, this is what sound religion leads to, right? If you're a religious person, you're going to dress in a particular way, you're going to carry yourself in a particular way, you're going to use particular terms all the time, you're going to refer to people who are not like you, like kuffar or fusaq, and all of these things that we've been accustomed to thinking that that is what the religion commands to. That is reflective of the prophetic teachings. And the prophetic teachings are nothing like that, right? One of the reasons that I always try to introduce the Shama'il to people is, one, they don't really know what it is. Most people, when I come into contact with them, they really haven't heard it before, we're not aware of it. And number two, it'll dispel all of these nonsense notions, right? Because if you just study the Shama'il, or if you just study the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, just his biography, that can be manipulated in a way, right? You can just talk about all of the ghazawat, you talk about all of the battles, and you don't focus on who the Prophet ﷺ was as a man, And then you're left with an impression that he was just a warrior, and that he was just a military leader, and that he was just a head of state, right? And this is what's important. So it's like, you know, think of the seerah as like a series of YouTube videos or YouTube clips. And then you just pick the YouTube clips that support your narrative, right? And then you go with that. Versus, for example, if you actually sat with the person in the YouTube clips, you got to know them, you saw what they, you know, how they speak to you, how they sit, how they relate to people, the internal characteristics of this person. Any YouTube videos that you see after that will be seen via the prism of what you already know. So when you study the Shama'il, then you see the Prophet ﷺ as he is, not as he's being projected via certain life experiences that he had. Because I can just, as I said, I took Ghazwat Badr or Uhud, right, with Khandaq, with Mu'tah, put those together, ignore everything else, and then here we are. We arrive at the idea that he was just a military leader, right? And I've seen books written, the Prophet, the military leader, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Or the Prophet, the statesman, or the Prophet this. And while we don't deny there are aspects to him, but to characterize him in that way, right? And not see him as what he actually was, which was Rasul, Nabi, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's what he was. And that's like unlike anything else. That's not comparable to be a military leader, anything like that. It's above and beyond. We don't even really understand what messengerhood or prophethood, risala and nubuwah actually mean, because we're so focused on these singular aspects of the Prophet ﷺ to fit our particular narrative that we want to further, and our particular narrative that we hold an agenda to.